This episode may contain stories of domestic violence. Please be advised. Welcome to the Sage Advice Podcast, where each week we sit down with people just like you who have left abusive relationships and found healing. Don't forget to check out our website, sage.community, because together we can survive abuse with grace and empathy. Now sit back and get comfortable. The Sage Advice Podcast starts right now. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Sage Advice Podcast. I'm Erin as usual, and today we're going to tackle a difficult topic, which is how you cope with traumatic events. So everybody copes in different ways, and there's often a lot of judgment surrounding how you cope and how quickly you bounce back. So to dig into this very complex topic, I've invited Eva back to the show. Thanks for coming, Eva.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
I know Eva has articles printed out. She's ready to go. But I first wanted to give you guys a little background of why I chose to dig into this topic. So for me personally, I went with a pretty typical coping mechanism, which is over drinking alcohol and overeating food. But as I've talked to other podcast guests and other members of the Sage community, I have seen how everybody copes in very different ways after a traumatic event or after a prolonged stress period. So, for example, for me, I've gained 15 pounds since the beginning of my relationship. However, some people go the complete opposite end of the spectrum and physically cannot eat and end up losing extreme amounts of weight. I have quite a few friends that has happened to. So you're talking about two different ends of the spectrum. And there's a lot of societal pressures and a lot of judgment about how we cope, how quickly we cope, what's a good way to cope and what's a bad way to cope. And so I wanted to peel back the veil and talk about what it's really like to deal with this, and also talk about the different types of coping mechanisms that are out there, because some of us might not know. So Eva and I talked yesterday about how each of us coped in kind of preparation for our talk today. And first of all, so Eva, with you, did you have any of the overeating or over drinking, when you were trying to deal with stuff?
I think throughout the years, mine have evolved, my coping strategies. And I'm not saying any of them were healthy or what they consider appropriate, adapting, whatever.
Which we don't need to use those words.
That's what I was going to say. With these articles I was reading, I was going to actually read a term of what coping actually was.
Great.
And all I kept seeing was blah, blah, blah. Because when you're in the middle of a trauma or recovering, none of that matters.
Right.
It's just you trying to get through the day. For me, I know probably in my earlier years, I had some drinking that I would do. Now, I've never been a big drinker, but probably my most consistent coping mechanism has been avoidance by either completely leaving the air. When you think of fight or flight, I'm a flight person.
Okay.
And be it that I physically leave the area, or for me, a big thing is sleeping, as you know. I will sleep until I feel distance enough from the event to be able to handle it, if that makes sense.
Well, when you were talking about sleeping yesterday, for me, I couldn't sleep. And it's funny because even last night before we're talking about this, I couldn't fall asleep. And, when it was at its height of things and I didn't know, if I was going to be harmed from one second to the next, the only thing that made me go to sleep was a glass of wine or a bottle of wine, and I drank myself to sleep so that I could sleep and that I could leave the situation and turn my brain off. So it's a similar escape mechanism.
Even now, though, cut yourself a break, because that whole not being able to sleep is that you were conditioned to be on high alert at all times in your relationship.
Yeah.
And so the thought, it's almost like being in the wild. Animals kind of slightly sleep so that they can always hear the danger coming.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Because
cut yourself a break.
every time there was a noise, every time there, was a light outside that I wasn't used to, I would, a million things would be going through my head. And so a lot of times even, the drinking only helped for a little bit and then it stopped helping. But it was something for me that I always felt it was short term, like I'll stop, right. I'll stop the wine as soon as this is over. But then it became a little habitual as well. And so it took me a while to stop drinking to that level, but also the healing process isn't linear, as we've talked about before. And so trying to get a handle on the coping process and even, not just alcohol, I started eating to the point where I didn't throw up, but I was sick. I've never binged like that. But that definitely started happening the more stressed I got. But then there's a lot of people who can't eat and they lose tons and tons of weight. And it stinks that society almost celebrates it. Like, you lost a ton of weight after your breakup. You look so great. Or like, you've gained 15 pounds since your breakup. You're not doing so well. Are
you okay?
Right. When it's like the same thing and it's not okay. Neither one of them are healthy for you, but that's all you can do when you're in the moment. And so I thought that was always a little unfair.
Well, it's one of those things that when you break a bone, the physician will put it in a cast and wait for it to heal because it takes time. We're the same way. Our internal selves are the same way. And be it that you're, instead of a cast, you are relying on eating. Imagine if you take that same coping skill and then start beating yourself up about it.
Right.
So the big question is there an imminent danger at that point in time that your coping skill is, putting in front of you? So let's say you were drinking, but you're drinking and driving. Okay, that's significant. Right. But sometimes if it's that you're sitting at home and you're eating a box of donuts, and I say, because I have been there before many times, but if you're sitting at home eating a box of donuts, other than your sugar going up at that moment in time, if that's what you need to get through, that's what you need to get through that moment. Because, your emotions are like tidal waves. Like, I think it was when you and I really started talking about all this, I realized, and this is years ago, I realized how much my coping mechanisms were sleeping. And I have slept 3 days straight practically before just to avoid what I felt at the moment. Wow. And then I look at what the goal of sleeping is, and it's because I try to detach myself from all emotion of an event. And I think you and I have talked about that before, where I want to get as far away from the actual emotion as possible, right, so I can actually deal with things in a logical way.
Well, it's the same as drinking too much.
Healthy? I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Distance the emotion.
Yep. You want to have fun. You want to distance the emotion. And like you touched on before, yes, it's something that if you're drinking, it's something that you have to watch and manage because you don't want your life to spiral out of control even more. And, drugs is, it's never something that I'm going to advocate because it's a self-destructive thing. But, there's also a level of just, I got to get through today. And then I'll figure tomorrow out. Cause it's a very day by day thing as you're going through it.
Well, and if you handle something that way today, and then you continue to add that guilt on top of what you're already dealing with, you're never going to get out of that cycle.
Right.
Forgive yourself. At the end of the day, forgive yourself and just say, I got through another day.
Well, I was thinking back to, I'm 35 now, birthday last week. And my first Weight Watchers meeting was 19. I think when I was 19. And so, I lost a lot of weight right away, but that's a really long time to be on a diet and to constantly be thinking about your weight. And I'm not that person that can't think about their weight. And because I just look at cookies and gain 5 pounds. And so it was it was just a break. Like I never got that college let loose drink all the time because I was Weight Watchers and I couldn't do that. And so I just gave myself the time to eat whatever I wanted and drink whatever I wanted and not care because I needed the break. I would say now though, like, I'm starting to get back. It's not like I was lying to myself and saying that, eating pizza every night for dinner and drinking a bottle of wine was a healthy way to deal with it. But at the time it was all I wanted to do. And that's all I could do to feel better.
Right. Well, I think that has to be done one step at a time. When you see people that suddenly they have, when you read about people say, oh, my coping mechanism is I'll go exercise.
Yeah.
Well, have you ever seen someone that does that to the point of obsessive?
Yes.
That's just the same thing. That's their addiction. That's their adrenaline rush for it. And they're trying to hide from the same stuff. Not saying that exercise isn't healthy. Again, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. No, it is. And I've heard from people and that's running is their therapy. And that I'm totally respect that running is their therapy. But again, as you mentioned, it can be taken to an extreme as well. So it has to be, I remember running is not my therapy. Running has never been my therapy. The gym is not my therapy.
No, mine neither.
And so for me to I was putting pressure on myself that whole time to be like, oh, you're gaining weight. You got to go to the gym. You got to go to the gym. And that was just another thing where I finally was like, this is annoying. I've been telling myself this for so long. I'm done. I don't want to do it.
Let me ask you this though, by beating yourself up like that, wasn't that just adding fuel to the damage that the person had already done to you, which was low self-esteem, making you feel like you're worthless. Nobody else will want you. So you're actually assisting them in your own demise.
Yep.
Why do that? Cut yourself a break that we can't be perfect people at the moment we need to be perfect people. And you will have good intentioned friends that will try to tell you, oh, this is awful for you. You look awful. Let me help. Really? You just left that kind of personality. Just saying, doesn't mean you don't love your friends, doesn't mean they don't love you. But I think the most crucial part is understanding where you are and accepting where you are and what you can do at that moment in time.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was, 6 months, maybe 9 months after I had, been living with some friends and been going to court and all that stuff. And I was just driving in my car and I started beating myself up for the weight that I've gained. And it was the first time where I realized I just can't do that anymore.
No, you can't.
And it had been 32 years of doing that, of that whole, you're too fat, you have to go to the gym, you're not eating right, you need to get it together, you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't do this. And there's a lot of like TikToks out there that tell you to do that and Instagram and Facebook that just, go to the gym or don't eat that Oreo because that's 100 jumping jacks if you eat that Oreo. And it's,
oh, please.
It's exhausting.
Let me tell you kind of something to put it on a grand scale for you. Mm-hmm. Now, this is telling people more than they want to know. But as you know, I had a double mastectomy last year.
Yeah.
So I had been fighting cancer for a while, much healthier. However, post double mastectomy, and I think you've even heard me complain about this, I started putting on weight in weird places. Mm-hmm. And I was beating myself up for looking like a potato. That's what I kept saying. I look like a potato head. I
remember.
I look like a Mrs. Potato Head that I saw in the drugstore. That's all I could focus on. And then it occurred to me, my God, I just beat cancer. Right. Would I look at someone else and say, how dare you look like this ever after just having what my brother jokingly refers to as a double amputation? I know, I love him.
Hey, we can laugh about cancer. We got to make exactly life of it.
Yeah. Trauma can be moments of funny.
Yes.
And so
it has
that
to be,
being
or else
said,
you're going to go insane. That's
that's
why
exactly right.
you got to throw some jokes in there here and there.
Now that's a coping mechanism I never want to lose.
Right. Laughter.
Humor. But at the same time, what I'm saying is, how ridiculous was it of me to hold myself to this incredible standard and to beat myself up for, why am I not at the gym? And why am I not eating healthier? You know what? You just lost your girls here. Maybe you want to cut yourself a break.
Yeah.
And I do seek coping and acceptance many times to be the same thing.
Yeah.
The first step to coping is acceptance, self-acceptance, I think. Now, I don't know if any psychiatrist or psychologist would support that statement, but I know for myself throughout life, it's true. I have to accept me.
Mm-hmm.
I have to accept what my limitations are. And if I do have bad coping skills that I've always used, I got to work through those myself.
Right.
Just ultimately be sure I'm protecting myself and any children or friends that may be, or family that may be involved. If my coping skills, they may not get me to the point of healthy within 3 weeks, like a diet pill might, but they will get me to the next 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And it comes a time. Now, my mother was not a fan of how much I was drinking at all. And she had the subtle practice of letting me know that. But I already knew that. She didn't have to tell, or, she didn't have to say anything. But, as many side eyes as I got from her, I knew it. I had to slow it down. And it just took my own time to slow it down. It took progress. And also COVID happened in the middle of this. And so that did not help.
Right.
But I'm in a better place. I did slow it down. I'm back on Weight Watchers, which is fine. Weight Watchers is fine, just to help me, curb the overeating. And also the stress has gone away mostly. And, it's still there. And so I think it just is a matter of time and everybody's own journey to get there. But the biggest thing is just, like you said, it's not judging yourself. That's the biggest takeaway or, blessing, if I could, out of this whole situation is when I have the negative self-talk, I talk myself right back out of it. And that was something that I never did before.
You just said something though that makes me kind of keyed me into one other part of this whole coping thing, which is, you said you joined Weight Watchers again, just to help you kind of guide it. What that Weight Watchers is doing for you is making you more aware, it seems, of how you're coping. It's not telling you you're wrong for eating. It's saying, hey, just be aware of how you're coping. The same thing with the drinking.
Yeah.
Be aware of what you're doing. And that way we can address problems if we know what they are. And sometimes we have to do one thing at a time. And I know my counselor has said to me so many times over the years that I have an enormous intolerance for my own emotions and healing. And that's
such a good way to put it. That is such a good way to put it. You're intolerant of how you're healing.
Yep. And I am, and we're all typically supportive of other people.
Right.
But boy, we don't accept anything from ourselves. And that's so hard on yourself.
Well, a lot of my idea to do this show was during Gabby's episode. We were talking afterwards, and she said, just about our different stories and learning a little bit more about each other. And she said, wow, I can't believe you've built Sage and you've done all of this. And it's only been little over 2 years since you left your relationship. That's amazing. And in my head, though, I should have been over it in 6 months.
Of course you should.
Yeah. So everybody's perspective is very different. And it's kind of nice to be reminded that, 2 years isn't as long as I think it is.
No. It's so, I look at my childhood pretty much in depth.
Yeah.
Look how many years I'm still dealing with it. And what happens when you go through a trauma and you think you should be healed in 6 months? there may always be triggers throughout your life that are going to remind you of that event. The key is how you handle that trigger later on. I don't think we can or really should ever forget the trauma, because then we forget the lessons we learned and how to protect ourselves from it ever happening again. Or if it happens, I should never say never. If it happens again, though, you recognize some of the signs sooner rather than later. But again, it's to think that in 2 years you should be over it. I know for myself, I didn't even start talking about my stuff till I was in my 40s. So
is
40
that
in 6 months?
So you had brought up yesterday the concept of disassociating as a coping mechanism. So, and you just brought it up now. So I'm curious if you could explain it a little bit.
Sure. Well, there's been some stuff in the news here lately because there's that actress, what is her name? Anna McCord or something like that. Anna Lynn
McCord, I think.
That's her.
Yeah.
She's talking about dissociating, and she's talking more about what has typically been referred to as multiple personality disorders. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a frightening topic for a lot of people. So I'm going to talk about that briefly, but then go down to the level that we're discussing right now.
Well, there's a Hulu documentary, Becoming Jane, The Many Sides of Jane, which is an in-depth documentary on somebody with multiple personalities. So anyway, if listeners out there want to go watch that and learn more about it, it's really interesting.
Well, I think too, which I was so excited to see her actually come forward with this, but it sounded more like she had a more developed level of this dissociation. For myself, I know what dissociation means to me is I can be physically in a place, but I can remove myself mentally, if that makes sense. I know where I am. I know who's around me. But it's almost like internally you take your self and you are devoid of emotion about it. And for instance, during a sexual assault, the one thing that is so clear to me that I remember is I could look down on myself and what was happening. It was like I was above me looking down, watching it all happen. That's dissociating. And it's not that I didn't know what happened. To this day, it's not that I don't know what is happening. But if I'm around emotions and chaos and stuff that is overwhelming to me, it's a detachment. That's exactly what it comes down to, is a detachment. So the one thing my daughter and I laugh about, because we're so open about mental health here in this house, is, a lot of counseling will tell you, oh yeah, we got to work on this dissociation. Well, for me, it's like, why? I kind of like it. I sit at a meeting for work. They start complaining about something. I'm not even halfway there. I don't care.
Well, it's a shell for you. It's a protective shield.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's the best way. And you don't
want to let down the protective shield. No, I'm to go back to that documentary, but it does help explain it. She, as a little girl, went through sexual trauma, and so that's when these, I guess, children started emerging in her personalities, because she had many children, a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, I think a 14-year-old as her personalities. And so if anything got triggered, then in her, then that personality that was protecting a different personality would come out. And, obviously that's a whole different level when you have, 7 personalities, but it's a similar concept in that we're trying to block an emotion or hide an emotion from ourselves.
Or hide ourselves from that situation.
Right.
I know one of the things that I did learn as you talk about her having all these characters, and some people will get to the point where they black out and don't know that they've gone into a different personality of themselves.
Right. I don't think she did.
For me, it's more of, and having learned more about this, is it's not that I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who the people were, what was going on. But sometimes if something was triggering me, like it can, I would have an emotion that would come up that I didn't understand, one, what the emotion was, or two, it was such an extreme emotion for the situation, it didn't make sense. Well, when you start thinking about your psyche, that situation triggered that moment in my life that I was in. So I was reflecting back unconsciously, basically, on my emotion at that time. And that's what was coming forward were my emotions. I was still me, but man, I reacted with old emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So the level doesn't necessarily match. My emotional reactions didn't match the situation, but
Right.
I didn't know why.
Well, what inspired me to do the episode on being triggered is just that. There was a situation I had that was very similar and gave me the same feelings as when I was in my relationship. And so anytime I was in this situation, it was more, social related, but I would get really stressed out and I would go into this dark place and I would feel anxious and, immediately want to go to Chick-fil-A and get a number one and then grab a bottle of wine on the way home. And that would be my night. And I just couldn't figure out why that was happening until I realized that it was being around a similar personality, being around a similar vibe and environment to what I was in that was really high stress and very volatile, that it would just put me right back to that time period. And so I would like to hope that I'm doing better now that I realize that, because I'm able to talk myself through a little bit more. Like, you're okay. This is the pattern. We've now discovered the pattern. You're going to be okay afterwards. It's going to be okay. And, it's almost like you have to, split into another person in a way and talk yourself through it.
It's almost like when you're going to work, how we always talk about putting our mask on for work.
Mm-hmm.
Your game face. It can be the same thing. It's a game face.
Yeah.
How do I get through this? But one of the things I think that is important also to remember is if you've got things that have happened in your past, your current, whatever it may be, that you're not dealing with, you're going to deal with them whether you want to or not. And people may, for instance, these emotions that I would feel that I had no idea where they would come from. So, of course, I told you I'm a flight person, fight or flight. I'm a flight. I'm out. That would be my reaction to things that people didn't understand why I suddenly left. But until you deal with that stuff that you're hiding or trying to suppress, you're not going to understand your reactions.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about basically you pieced it together. This is a trigger because of this, and this is why I feel this way. And then you get to look at yourself and say, does it match the situation?
Mm-hmm. Right. I thought my brain was broken for a while.
Yeah.
You go through a few weeks of being good and feeling like you're on top of the world. And then being somewhere would trigger something and you're right back to, dominoes. And so once I realized that, however, it's been more of a prolonged period since I've been triggered. So, I said that to Gabby a little bit, is once you find that little barb in your brain that's causing this, you can remove it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it comes up, and then you have a new barb that you have to remove. But slowly over time, and the more you are aware and you honestly have the intention to figure it out and get better, you can slowly figure it out.
You just said the key word, aware. Again, awareness. You have to not be afraid to recognize these things. If you're feeling something you don't understand, there's probably a reason.
Right.
And that's where self-reflection comes in, and not being afraid to look at who you are, not as defined by your past relationship or anyone around you, but look at who you are as defined by you.
Mm-hmm.
And be aware of that. This isn't something that other people get to judge about you. They don't get to tell you you're wrong to feel that way. It's about you and facing who you are. And okay, if I'm having this, intense reaction, that must have really sucked what I went through. And I just haven't given myself the space to accept how I reacted then and how I want to react to anything that reminds me now. Again, cut ourselves a break. Quit being so intolerant of ourselves.
Well, I keep thinking about why I chose the word grace for sage, for the G in sage.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, grace is so important to show to yourself. And it's also, it's, really just being forgiving and kind and understanding with yourself. But there was also a point where, I didn't feel like people understood what was happening to me and what was going on, and was lashing out a lot at people because they didn't understand. And so they were telling me to just get better and get over it and do this and do that. And I wasn't having it. And I think it's okay to, instead of coming at people with anger or beating yourself up or verbally beating them up or something, it's okay to take yourself out of situations for a while and out of friendships for a while, because the number one person in your life has to be you when you're going through it.
You're sitting there with yourself at all times. I know, I think you and I have talked about this before. I don't know if we've talked about it on one of these podcasts, but as you said, accepting yourself and the people around you facing your anger or you lashing out and them not understanding it. Sometimes once we realize that we're doing it, it's not a bad thing to give the people close to us a heads up. Like if you realize you're lashing out at everyone, sometimes it's okay to say, you know what? This isn't about you at all. This is me just dealing with me and what I have to fix in myself or heal. So if you, for instance, you've heard me talk about,
yes,
I had to tell him right up front that when certain things occurred, I'm very quick to hear rejection in things that someone would say in a personal relationship. They may say something, have absolutely no intention of it being a rejection of any sort, but from my past experiences, that's what I hear. So if there's a way to twist the interpretation of what they've just said to me, I'll find it. But he, from his past experiences, heard things with anger. So he would think I was mad about something, and I'm thinking, what? It doesn't make any sense. Once we both realized that and acknowledged it, at certain times, if it looks confusing, I can say, I'm not angry about this. I just wanted to tell you such and such. Or he can say, this isn't rejection, but da 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 da. Yeah. And to have something framed like that before you hear it, and to not be afraid to tell somebody that you're got an interpersonal relationship with that, hey, I'm coping with this. It gives them a fighting chance. It really does.
Yeah, it makes me think of a situation I had with my mom, and we don't really get into many fights, but her way of helping is to do. She cannot sit down. She has to go all the time. She wants to make your house better or everything better so that you'll be better. And so when she came to visit a month or two, I think after, her way of trying to help me was to organize my house and try to get it ready for me. And it was a very nice intention. However, I walk in the door from work and I'm very tired and I want to lay down, and she's ready to go. Right. And I couldn't lay down. I had to go carry this or move this or go to Lowe's or go to Target or go to the store because she has a list of things that she wants to get done. And what ended up happening was a very hostile week and a lot of fighting. I hurt her feelings and I felt bad about that. But then, when she got home and we talked about it on the phone, I felt terrible for hurting her feelings, but it was also a boundary that I had to set, because by her doing that, it was taking me back to feeling not in control. And that was not something I was willing to go back to.
Understood. I mean, that's a great example. I know for my daughter, you talk about your mom wanting to fix things around you and such. My daughter had to start telling me, or I had to start asking her, because we're both, again, very aware of things, or we try to be. But she had gotten where she was hesitant to tell me about problems because I'm a fixer. Now, I'm not going to organize her house and stuff, but you tell me who I need to call. You tell me who I need to talk to, and let me take care of business. And so when she would start to tell me about a problem, I've had to start asking, is this something you want me to help you fix, or do you want me just to listen? It's made the world of difference, because sometimes she just needs me to listen. So when you clarify where you are sometimes to people, again, it gives them a fighting chance around you. Yeah. And sometimes as parents, like in your mom's case, and in my case, our reaction to our children needing help is one, because that's that instinct in us. Right. And two, because it's all we know to do, it makes us feel better then. So we may jump the gun and start helping our children in a way that they're thinking, leave me alone. You're the worst thing around me right now.
Right.
But it makes us feel better.
And it's totally understandable for me.
Exactly.
And, you know,
oh, absolutely.
I'm still a 2-year-old in her eyes sometimes. And I totally understand that. And I am happy that we were able to discuss that. And I had to get the verbalization from my counselor, because I at the time couldn't understand why I was so frustrated. And I knew that I was being mean and lashing out, but I didn't understand the why behind it. But it was a needed discussion that we had afterwards. And I'm still happy that we had that.
I am too, because what you've done though is you explained what you needed.
Right.
And you didn't know it at the time, what you needed, of course. But I think that's fantastic. And you're right. It's absolutely okay, because sometimes we don't even know that something's not going to work for us as somebody helping until they start doing it. And then we're like, you're the last person I want to be around. And it's just because that may be all they know at the time. As I said, and this is with friends even. I have had good friends that have, through different scenarios, and one of them being the friend that wants to tell you need to get out of that relationship right now, right now, right now, right now. I don't want to hear you talk about it anymore. Get out of it.
Right.
That's not what I needed from that person.
No, the immediate reaction you're going to get from that is for the person to shut down and shut you out.
That's the key. Shut down, shut out. And that wasn't her intention at all. But again, that was how she felt better about my scenario. You need to get out. Well, and well, that's the obvious answer. But I'm dealing with a whole lot of life in between. And so sometimes I think that if everyone would also give themselves permission to tell people what they actually need, if they recognize it at all. And if somebody's trying to help you in a way that's not actually beneficial, it's okay to tell them. You just be honest with yourself.
And if they don't understand, then you need to create the distance. Like, it goes back to, this has to be all about you. You have to be selfish, and it's okay. It's not even, selfish is a terrible connotation, but you need to take care of yourself and not allow the stress to enter your world when it's unnecessary. And I have a feeling a lot of people have lost friends that way, but were they really that supportive and great of a friend if they can't honor your request to give you some space so that you can heal in your own way?
Or just listen.
Yeah.
That's a big phrase right there. Just listen. I can remember my grandfather he had cancer, and he lived with me, and I was taking care of him. And I ended up, telling my friends around me, my coworkers, even my new manager, I'm doing the bare minimum right now I can to get by. I'm focused on my grandfather because he was terminal.
Yeah.
And I said, if I forget your birthday, if I don't seem like I'm listening, or if I just don't show up at this point in time, I need you to forgive me. All of my behaviors right now are excused because I'm doing the best I can. And it's not long term, but that's what I needed at that moment. And it's interesting, including the brand new manager, not one person gave me a hard time. Not one person said, well, you're not doing enough. I don't care, but I set that stage for them to understand this is all you get from me right now. And if I hurt your feelings, I'm sorry right now, because I'm probably not going to even acknowledge it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm focused on me and my grandfather.
Yeah. No, I experienced similar when I just felt like talking to one person today is a lot of energy.
Yep.
And so I just don't need to be pushing it. But, before we wrap up this session, because it's a really interesting conversation, we'll have to have more on the topic. But I wanted to include supporters as part of Sage, because I think it's important to listen to these podcasts and understand what your loved one is going through so that you can better help them. Because a lot of times I think, people don't attempt to understand, and they don't attempt to really empathize with what, their loved one is going through, and it causes a rift in your relationship. And so when I'm very happy that my mom listened to me and that we could get through it. But I know that there's a lot of people that don't have that relationship with their parents or loved ones where they feel heard or listened to. But I wanted to make sure that I included supporters as part of Sage, because it is so important to heal the whole unit and the whole family along with the individual person. And
that's an excellent point.
Hopefully conversations like this and people listening to it can shed some light on what you're going through, can help the people who are going through it, but also shed some light on the situation for others.
Well, and sometimes I think that it's one thing to keep in your mind that when you're turning to somebody for help, their reaction to you may be about them having something similar in their background that they don't want to deal with or what have you. In other words, we're all coming from our past experiences in some angle.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be that everybody's the bad person.
Nope.
For not getting it or what have you.
Exactly. Yeah. I just hope that this was helpful, and it was eye-opening and helpful for me too, Eva. So thank you for having this conversation with me. Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by our discussions, but it's one of those things that when we end, I'm also always thinking, I wish I had helped people this way or that way, or I wish I could help more people, because there's nothing better about this entire experience in our lives than being able to use it to help anyone else. And everybody that listens to these, that reads anything about it, they all have the ability to help. Every one of us have the ability to help somebody else just by having the experience and being able to acknowledge it.
Yeah. And every person that has come on so far and shared their story, I thank so much. But they all wanted to share their story to help those of you who are listening, who are either going through it, trying to get through the healing process. And so they heard somebody they related to and decided, you know what, it's my turn. I need to tell my story. And so I just wanted to close it by saying that everyone's welcome to come and have a conversation with me and share your story. And I tell everybody, share what you feel comfortable with. Don't make this an uncomfortable situation for you. But sharing your story and your experience is always going to help somebody else out there. So thank you for joining me and sharing some of your insights, Eva.
Can I just add one caveat?
Yeah, of course.
I want to make sure that everyone knows that I am in no way whatsoever a professional anything at this. This is just my personal experiences. And so if anyone does come and talk to you, Erin, which I think is so helpful for everybody, it's like having a really close, understanding friend sitting on the front porch with you, just talking.
Yeah. That's what I try to do.
Yeah, it's like having your best friend sitting there. And that's what you're bringing to the table. But I think that's what everybody needs to understand. They have access to now.
Yeah. I'm sorry if Toby came in the background while you were saying that. You can't edit it
No.
out because it was so great what you were saying. But my dog Toby just, likes to be difficult sometimes at the end of these podcasts. But yes, I very much agree. The reason I started Sage is because there are so many wonderful counselors out there and mental health professionals. But it's very different to talk to a mental health professional versus talking to a friend or talking to somebody who's been through it. And they're both valid in their own right. But I wanted to give a voice to us regular people who've all been through it.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Go to our website, sage.community. We have a lot of new webinars coming up soon, so you'll be able to check that out and participate with us more. Check out our Facebook at Our Sage Community, and we will talk to you later. Have a good week, everybody. Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or if you're willing to share your story, please email us at sageadvicepodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, remember, when you're kind to yourself, the healing can begin. See you next time.
This show was brought to you by inflowradio.com, the best curated talk radio network for personal development, wellness, spirituality, and conscious business.
If you or someone you love is in immediate danger, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. For more information, please see the resources tab at sage.community.